Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Impossible Podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Impossible Gear, as always. If you're looking to push your limits and do something on your impossible list, head on over to impossiblegear.com to get your impossible shirt, your impossible hoodie, and all sorts of other impossible gear. They look awesome, they feel great, and they may cause you to spontaneously decide to run an ultramarathon. So we have to put that disclaimer in there just in case it happens. Impossible Gear is the best way to get comfortable while doing something uncomfortable. So head on over to impossiblegear.com today and check it out. Today's guest is Akshay Nanavati. He's a former Marine, a PTSD survivor, turned entrepreneur, and he's currently attempting to run across every country on the planet. I originally connected with him a few years ago while talking about running ultramarathons and different quests we were working on. He's an inspiring dude with a cool mission, and he actually even got me started running across a few countries of my own. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this one. So without further ado, who says that, guys? Who says without further ado still? But I don't have a better thing to say there. So let's get it. All right, and we're live. I'm here with Akshay Nanavati. I think I got that right. Founder of Fearvana and man who is running across. You've made it your mission to run across every single country in the world. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That is. As crazy
So
as it sounds.
We've actually, it doesn't
You can
sound that
relate.
crazy to me. I'm like, I'm down. So I think we met 2 or 3 years ago, just via the internet. But if you want to go ahead and give people a little bit of your background, a little bit of your story,
Sure.
we can start there and then kind of go from there.
Yeah, sure. So a little bit about what led me to Fearvana and everything I'm doing now. The journey kind of started in high school where, after moving from India to Singapore to the US, I got into drugs pretty heavily for about a year and a half. I lost 2 friends to drug addiction, and I was very much headed down that path. But thankfully, I got out after watching the movie Black Hawk Down. It inspired me, decided to join the military. 2 doctors told me boot camp would kill me because of a blood disorder I had since I was born. But as you can relate, I went anyway, obviously survived, did 6 years in the Marines, 1 tour in Iraq. And from the Marines is when I started figuring out other ways to push my limits. So I went mountain climbing, rock climbing, cave diving, ice climbing, you name it. Just the outdoors became kind of my playground. And then in 2007, I was deployed to Iraq as an infantry Marine. Great life experience, but came back, was diagnosed with PTSD, and then struggled with alcohol till it hit a point where I considered taking my own life. And when I got that, really hit me hard that I would even think that. So that's what led me to the research and years of research in neuroscience, psychology, spirituality, to this concept of Fearvana. And ultimately took me about 3 years to write the book about it. And now what we're doing with Fearvana. And in that process is when I also came up with this idea to run across every country in the world, because I knew I had a fairly addictive personality and I wanted to channel it into something meaningful.
Very cool. So let's back on up to
Sure.
the high school, college. You said you got heavily into drugs. What was your background growing up? How do you just go? You start off. You just went through 3 cycles of up, down, up, down, up, down,
Yeah,
up, down,
there's a lot.
all over the place. So what started the cycle of I'm always really interested when people talk about addictive personalities and addiction, because I have a fairly addictive personality, and if I didn't channel it towards working out and doing all these other things, I would have gone down a different road a long time ago.
Right.
And if you don't mind, take us back to the drug aspect, and then right before kind of that story right before you enrolled in the Marines
Sure.
and kind of what was going on there.
Yeah.
And then we can kind of talk about the Marines and the running and all that stuff.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I moved from I moved a lot when I was a kid. I moved from Bombay to Bangalore, then to Singapore, and at 13 I moved to Austin. So I had no
different, slightly different.
yeah. So, but, just exactly. It was a kind of. I mean, at the time, I was very lost. I didn't moving around a lot. I wasn't sure who I was, and I was comfortable making friends in new places, and obviously I don't blame my friends now. I take full responsibility for my actions, but being lost, and I guess also kind of having this addictive personality from a young age. I mean, even in Singapore, I used to run barefoot on rocks just to test myself, right? Like I used to be the one when I played rugby as a kid. If I got cut, I would love that cut because it was like a battle scar, So I always had this kind of pushing my limits thing, and I always say that if I had found a group of friends that were maybe into big time rock climbers or mountaineers, I probably never would have gotten to drugs. But again, I don't blame my friends, of course, but collectively that personality channeled with this environment, and even with them, I was the first guy. Me and one other guy were the first two in the group to start going into harder stuff, and that one other guy is no longer alive today. So that could have easily been me. And thankfully, watching that movie Black Hawk Down was literally a trigger that transformed my life. It led me to reading book after book on military and combat, and that's when I almost overnight said, okay, I'm going to stop this this meaningless lifestyle, and decided to enlist in the Marines. And because of my blood disorder, that took me about a year and a half to get in, so I had to kind of fight my way in. But being a post 9/11 world, they were eager for recruits like me who who wanted to come in no matter what. So I finally managed to get my way into Marine Corps boot camp.
So what was the impetus right there to sign up for the Marines? You just go from pretty heavily into drugs,
yeah.
And then you have this blood disorder, and then where does the Marines come in? What tripped you back back onto hey, I need to get things sorted out?
Yeah. Have you seen the movie Black Hawk Down, Joel?
I've seen I want to say I saw half of it.
Okay.
Back when it first came out, because I was like, oh, cool war movie, but I never actually. I've got a whole list of movies that I've made it halfway through, and then I just I've got other things to do.
I got you. So yeah, I mean, like you said, it's a war movie, and it's it's based on a true story. And in the movie, there's a scene where two guys and two Delta snipers in a chopper volunteer to go down to the ground to set up a defensive perimeter, knowing that thousands of armed enemy personnel are headed their way, but they volunteer to go down anyway to protect one of their fallen soldiers. And just watching that, what kind of human beings would have that kind of courage? What kind of people would be able to do that? Sacrifice. Ultimately, they both died, and they received the Medal of Honor, which is the highest award in the military for valor. They received it posthumously, of course, but that triggered something in me. And I still remember, after the theater, I went and read the book, and then just reading book after book on military and combat. It to me, war became this experience in combat and life in the military. To war brings out the best and the worst in humanity. And I've been, I can say, blessed or cursed to see both as well. And I wanted to see what it bring out within me. I wanted to challenge myself, and really in the Marines, the good of the group matters more than the good of the individual. And that's this drugs is this very selfish, meaningless existence. I wanted to experience the other side of that, where you're living for something bigger than yourself. And it was, absolutely no regrets. It was one of the most things I'm most proud of in my own life. So it was an amazing life experience my whole time in the Marines.
And so when you go, did you just watch the movie and then head to the recruitment office?
No, it was, I was actually, that movie definitely was the start though, because then I started reading the books, and then initially I wanted to go Army Rangers because the movie was my trigger, and the movie's about Army Rangers. But then, Marines are the best, let's face it. So, so I thought I'll go to the Marines, and then I wanted to go Special Forces, but at the time I wasn't a U.S. citizen, so you can't go, become an officer or go Special Forces unless you're a citizen, because it requires secret clearance. So I just decided to go Marines, and I figured down the road I would go into Special Forces. But at that, eventually after my deployment and everything, I decided to move on and challenge myself in other ways.
Okay. And so you were there for 6 years?
6 years in the, about 4.5 of that was in the reserves, and 1.5 was active.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And as far as shifting your personality, did you basically take I'm curious how you go from, you said you're pretty heavily into drugs, mm-hmm. And then you watch a movie, and then all of a sudden you're a Marine. What's the progression there? Was it a big shock to the system? Were you having a lot of trouble? What was the adjustment period for you as you completely changed the trajectory of your life?
I mean, I remember going to boot camp, and obviously boot camp is pretty brutal. I don't know if you've seen in those boot camp movies like Full Metal Jacket, but Marine Corps boot camp is fairly, known and legendary for being pretty tough. But the thing is, like, I mean, yeah, first week I was like, definitely had moments where I'm like, what the hell am I doing? Why did I sign up for this? But ultimately, like, I wasn't very physically fit at the time. Obviously just came out of all these drugs. I started training for the Marines, but I was by no means one of the fittest people there. But mentally, I knew that this is exactly who I wanted to be, and so like, I thrived. And I knew this one guy in boot camp who, like, before joining used to run like 16, 20 miles regularly, like wear Marine Corps shirts, like really motivated, just wanted to be a Marine, but came to boot camp within like 2-3 weeks. He just broke down crying. So ultimately, it was definitely the mental game that mattered, because Marine Corps boot camp, they're going to push you till nobody can do any more push-ups or run anymore. They want to see, are you still trying, right? So I wasn't super fit at the time, but I knew that this is exactly what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be. So I loved boot camp, great life experience. I loved infantry school, and I was blessed. I mean, I graduated infantry school as the honor graduate in my platoon. So like, I really thrived in that, in that experience, and was definitely realized this was a far better path than the one that I had been living before that.
It's always interesting to me when people talk about the boot camps and the hell weeks and everything like that, because I interviewed Paul Tharp, who was the command master chief over at Coronado for the SEALs, and I was asking him about his hell week with the SEALs, and he, like, I was like, okay, so did you go in? You're like, I really want to do this. Like, it's going to be tough. Did you ever want to give up? He's just like, I went there, and I just, like, he just decided, like, he's like, I'm doing this. Like, this is happening. And it's funny to me that a lot of time, the only real difference for people that, like, make it through a tough experience like boot camp or Hell Week or whatever, and Hell Week specifically is notorious for kicking people out or whatever, but deciding up front that you're gonna do it. And you said, this is exactly who I want to be. And so then when all the stuff hits you in the face, then it's, it's expected, and you just keep rolling with it.
Yeah.
And that's cool to me. I mean, like, that's the same thing I deal with in races. I just decide, at the beginning of the race, this is happening, and it's going to suck, and you're going to get over that pretty quickly, or you're going to, give up and cry and go home.
Yeah. No, totally can relate. Obviously, with the things you do, and like you said, you can relate. And obviously, I don't know, like, Navy SEAL Hell Week, and I know I've heard the stories, and I know how brutal it is, at least from reading and stuff like that. But we have in the Marines, the boot camp, our version of that was called Crucible, and I remember twisting my ankle in like the first hike in the Crucible. And I remember going to my drill instructor, and he said, you can go to a medic, but if you do, they'll probably drop you from this platoon, and you'll have to go to like a medical recovery platoon, or you can grind it out. And I remember him, like, sort of saying, what are you going to do? Like, testing me. And I was like, all right, I'm not going to go to medical recovery. I didn't want to be there any longer than I had to. So I was like, I want to graduate with my platoon. But because I was twisting my ankle, he would, like, punish me more to test me. Like, I remember during the hikes, he would make me low crawl to the back of the thing, and then run to the front of the, run to the front of our little, like, squad, the hikes, and then keep doing that back and forth. And eventually, like, my ankle became this purple ball, but, like, the pain numbs out. And as I'm sure you can relate, when you do this, like, mentally and physically, the pain numbs, and you just become, like, I think you kind of become one with it in this really beautiful way that allows you to keep pushing through. And it's an incredible experience, I think, as you can relate for sure.
Yeah, after a while, you're like, okay, that's going to be there for a bit.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, the shooting pains are almost worse than just like the active pain that just kind of is there no matter what.
Yeah.
Like, if it's like, if you feel it every single time, like, you hit, then you're like, oh no, I'm reminded every single time. But there is something where you're just like, okay, I've got 12 miles left to go, and this is going to suck, but I'm going to knock it out.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
so, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, it's a beautiful thing when I think the best thing about those moments is discovering your own ability to rise above that pain, rise above the suffering to accomplish something. And I think that, like, when you discover who you are in that, it's an absolutely beautiful experience.
Well, it's interesting too when you realize that pain is just a sensation, and it's just like it yeah, if you break your foot or whatever, it's a specific issue, but there's a interesting aspect where you can go hurt yourself like that, and you can push through it. And, fitness wise may not be the most medically sound advice to do, but you can do it. And most people don't even get to the point. They're like, okay, well, I ran like, a couple miles and I was out of breath, and then I gave up. And you're like, well, like, you're going to be out of breath. Like, that's part of the issue. And when you realize that you can go beyond being out of breath, you can go beyond being tired, you can go beyond, even pain and hurting and injuries, and you can keep going in spite of that. It's it just kind of opens your eyes to everything else that you could potentially go after and try to do.
Yeah, it's like a rebirth, right? It like builds a new you that you can then bring with you into all areas of your life. It's a beautiful thing.
That's cool. So you make it through boot camp, and then you said you were in the reserves for a while.
Yeah. So as soon as I came out, I volunteered to go to Iraq every chance I could get. Like that's why I signed up. I wanted to go to war. And admittedly, I had a fairly naive perspective about war and the nature of it. But that's what so as soon as I joined the reserve unit, I kept trying to go, and twice they told me I'm going and then canceled it last minute. So like I remember withdrawing from school. So when I finally did end up going, like I had so many going away parties, people just thought that I'm like, is he actually going to war, or is he just having parties saying that he is? But yeah, finally then 3 years later after enlisting, I got my opportunity and was sent to Iraq.
And then what did you do when you were out there?
So I was in infantry, and I made a very conscious effort to really learn principles of counterinsurgency warfare, to learn Arabic. So I think my officers saw that. So they pulled, like, I was initially a squad leader in like a corporal, as a non-commissioned officer in charge of 12 Marines, but I got moved from that. And first I was really upset about that, and I got put into the little intelligence self of our infantry unit. So which meant my job was like, we had a wide variety of things we did out there. We were out the wire for almost every day from the 7 months, because I was in the company commander's squad. So we were doing all kinds of things, from like searching the desert for bombs, engaging with people in the streets, going into meetings. I was like one of the only enlisted men who would be in meetings filled with officers and senior Iraqi leaders to like figure out how to rebuild the country. So that was really interesting from that perspective. But like one of my jobs out there was to walk out in front of our vehicle convoys to look for IEDs, improvised explosive devices, before they could blow up our vehicles. So that was a fairly dangerous job, as you can imagine. So it sort of became a running joke out there that Nanavati is going to get blown up today. Funny, right? So
well, interesting you said that. I think I have. Do you know who Rob Jones is?
Yes, yeah.
So he's a Marine ID.
Yep.
I don't know his official title in the Marines yet, but I still got to do my research on that. But I met him because he was doing 31 marathons in 30 days. But he's going to be on the podcast here soon, so we're going to have a bunch of a good representation of
love it.
IED clearing Marines.
Yeah, no, his story is amazing. In fact, he was I don't know if you've seen my Fearvana book trailer. He was in it too. So there's
I did see that. I was like, I know many of those people in the Fearvana trailer.
Yeah. Dean Karnassus, Noah Galloway, Iron Cowboy, all those guys were in it.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So you spend what, a year and a half clearing IDs? Is that
7 months in Iraq?
Okay.
Marine tours are 7 months.
Okay. I thought you said you were there for you're active.
So
you're
active with other stuff, like with training. We did a 5-month workup for Iraq, and then like 3 months of boot camp, 2 months of infantry school. So collectively, all of that was active duty time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what happens when you come home?
So when I came back, I came to my senior year of undergrad. That was a hard adjustment, to say the least. I didn't have the level of self-awareness I do now, so I was very like, a lot of disdain for college students who whine about like really stupid things compared to what I had just seen in war, and forget about my own struggles in war, like the Iraqi people who had been living for years under oppressive regimes, and like the struggles they had been through and the resilience through which they handled it. And you come back to college and people are just whining about stupid things, And now, like looking back, finals, finals and this, that, and the other thing, and like, looking back, you can't blame him. Everybody's got the level of perspective and awareness that they have, so you can't blame him for not like. But at the time, again, I didn't have this kind of, awareness that I do now. So I was very judgmental, and I struggled. I remember every time I would drink at a party, I'd end up probably, like, more often than not, we'd end up like crying and calling my buddy being like, dude, let's just go back. And so I tried to volunteer to go back to Iraq, go back to Afghanistan, as much as possible. But that once again didn't happen. So like the first time I volunteered, it didn't happen until 3 years. So I didn't get my chance. And finally, after I met my wife when we were doing our master's in Syracuse, New York. And at that point, I said, let's move on. I can find other ways to challenge myself and other ways to serve our collective human family in more meaningful ways. Because of course, the thing with the Marines is the challenge is there. You are serving a group, separate from the politics. On the ground, you're just doing something meaningful, but you have no freedom, of course, at all. And in Iraq, like the officers told you to do something and you had to go do it. And oftentimes there were many stupid things that we had to go do, but we had to do it. So I didn't want to put my life on the line for something like that. If I figured if I'm going to put my life on the line, let it be on my terms. So that's what had me get out.
So you had this addictive personality coming in. You go in. You have these really intense IED clearing experiences. You come back. Was it a temptation to get back into drugs then? Was it something that you were thinking about? Was like always around, or did you just closed off that part of your life?
Yeah, that part had been like very closed off. I mean, even like weed, I'd be like hanging around people, they'd all be smoking weed, and I wouldn't like, there was not even like a temptation. The alcohol was, I mean, I was drinking at the time, college student. I never really saw it as a problem at the time. Like, I was still doing well in college. I got great grades in undergrad, great grades in my master's program. And, I would like party like a college student. So I'm like, whatever, so when weekend parties roll around, I would get pretty freaking hammered, but I never really saw it as a problem. Because even later on in my life, when I started to see it a problem, my thing was I would never like drink every day or anything. But when I did drink, I got pretty freaking drunk. And that was clearly a problem. But I only saw it as such much later on. And I was only diagnosed with PTSD like years after the war as well, when it finally became like a problem. And then my wife sort of pushed me to say, hey, let's go to the VA and figure out what's going on. And that's when I was diagnosed years later. And that's also, again, what led me to the research, which led me to Fearvana. So grateful for all the experiences, the highs and the lows.
So what's that like when you get the realization that you need to go see someone for PTSD? Because I think everybody hears about this stuff. They hear veterans coming back with it. They may or may not even know what it is, and it might show up in different ways for different people. But what is that? What did that look like for you?
So, I mean, it led to that because my wife and me were going through some problems in our marriage, and in multiple ways, like just connection problems, as well as, to be very frank and vulnerable about it, physical problems. And I realized it wasn't a physical issue. There was some psychological thing happened. So my wife is like, let's just go get it, checked out and stop running away from it. So obviously it was like initially hesitant. I mean, this was again years after the war. So I was like, there's nothing wrong. I'm fine. And like not really seeing, at that point, I started to kind of recognize that alcohol was a problem. Like, because I knew that when I did drink, I drank a lot. And, so it was hard going there, getting that diagnosis. I mean, even in the, all the meetings, it was always hard bringing stuff up. I mean, my biggest thing, because I struggled with for a long time is, so as I mentioned, when I first joined the unit, I was volunteering to go to war, ever since I joined. And it was actually with a buddy of mine. We both volunteered together. We were like the same kind of Marine. His name was Corporal Jacob Neal. And, like we when we used to do the rifle range, like we would shoot together and compete together, but I'd always beat him by like 1 point. On the runs, we would start together, but I'd beat him by like a few seconds. So one summer while I was vacationing in India, here in India, he actually finally found a unit to go with, and he went without me, and he never made it back. And I always felt that if I had gone with him, I could have been in his seat, because he got promoted to corporal. He was a good Marine. And I felt like, and I get rationally how like crazy this might sound, but emotionally it was like, maybe I would have gotten that promotion and I would have been in his seat. So when I came back from the war, it was like, I didn't get shot. I didn't lose limbs. I didn't get killed. What the hell have I done? It's like, I didn't suffer enough to earn my place. And there was that guilt just permeating through my life, and having the structure of college sort of like gave me some structure to navigate that. Like, I had to turn in grades. I had things. But when I left college, I had a corporate job for a year and a half, and then I started my own business. But as you know, I mean, you run your own business. It's like, if you don't impose structure upon yourself and you don't have some rigid, discipline, it's easy to just say, okay, today I won't do shit, like I'll just watch TV or whatever. And without that externally imposed structure, I started to delve into darker places that like that guilt came up. I just felt again, like, what right do I have? So I was always kind of putting a barrier on myself without really knowing it, that because I felt like I didn't deserve to be happy, didn't deserve to be successful or anything. And that really, so that when it finally pushed me, it was hard to hear, but again, it led me to like the darkest moments when I thought about taking my own life. But I'm also grateful because that eventually led me to the research that led me to Fearvana and everything I'm doing now. So, and I mean, as you can probably tell from my story, I'm the kind of person who has to like make tons of mistakes, fall a lot to rise back up. But generally when I do rise back up, I think I rise back up stronger. So,
so how does that, how did you just go from, going to the VA to doing the research that you're talking about, and if you can talk about specifically what type of research it is.
Sure.
But like, how did that happen? Like, what was that experience like? Were you, what was that experience like?
So like I was going fairly regularly to the VA then to the therapist to get checkups and whatever, to talk about it, to figure it out. And often it would lead me to drinking more, to be honest with you. And I remember like after one like 5 to 6 day binge drinking session, just downing like liters of vodka and alcohol, I woke up thinking that, that this pattern of drinking and sobering up is never going to change. So what's the point of going on? And like the fact that I even thought that was very hard for me. So it then said, okay, something needed to change. So I started researching, reading book after book again. That was my pathway out, like when I got out of drugs to join the Marines. So this was once again my path out, reading all kinds of books on neuroscience, on psychology, on spirituality, to initially just to heal myself. But of course, I realized that I'm by no means the only person in the world suffering, right? So how do we all navigate that? And, like one of the, so to kind of make it tangible in terms of the research, one of the most valuable things I started figuring out was that the symptoms of post-traumatic stress are not indicative of a disorder. But although they were used to label me as PTSD, like that's why I always say I was diagnosed with PTSD as opposed to I have PTSD, because for example, I was very jumpy with loud noises. I didn't like crowds. And that was, those were symptoms that they said, okay, I think they rated me on some score. And if I remember correctly, like my score was 55. And now looking back, it was kind of crazy to me that this is how you diagnose someone with PTSD. It's just like these little symptoms, and then you had a score, and now, okay, it means you have PTSD. But to me, like being jumpy when there's loud noises, my brain had learned to associate loud noises with death. Inevitably, I was a lot more jumpy. And, emotionally powerful experiences live longer in your memory, and they stay deeper implanted into your implicit memories, into the amygdala, which is the sort of the fear center of the brain. And inevitably, I was more jumpy with loud noises. Inevitably, I didn't like crowds because, crowds could mean a lot of people trying to kill you in the war. So you kind of get those things were just becoming part of me. Same thing with the survivor's guilt. I learned to channel my survivor's guilt at something meaningful. Like today, for example, I have a picture up of my friend on my wall, and it says, "This should have been you. Earn this life." So it's like learning that every emotion can be useful, because we live in a world that demonizes emotions like fear, stress, anxiety, guilt, anger. Like these are quote unquote negative, but they're not negative. And there are no good or bad emotions. There's just emotions, and it's up to us to decide what we do with them. So becoming conscious of that fact was really valuable for me, and realizing, like when you do these runs, it's scary, it's stressful, it's hard, there's anxiety, but those are not bad emotions. Those are just emotions. Those are natural emotions to experiences like war, or experiences like running in Antarctica, stuff like that, intense experiences. And then you can channel it into because that fear becomes energy, as Richard Branson himself says. So learning some of that stuff about the nature of the brain, about how memories work, how I can then recreate new memories, allowed me to shift my own experiences and ultimately find value in all of them, including my guilt.
Interesting. And so what is that? Once you do that, you said you were running your own business. I don't know if Fearvana was up and running quite yet, but point, no. What did that shift look like into starting Fearvana, and then kind of what was the purpose of that?
It took me about 3 years to write the book. So I was doing business in sort of this quote unquote expert space, like coaching and stuff like that, mostly just one-on-one coaching. And it was going well. Again, I was like doing well enough to, live a good quality of life, but I had this sort of subconscious barrier to really push me to the next level, which I only discovered later. But again, it was going well. And then I remember Jack Canfield, the Chicken Soup for the Soul author, I did some work with him in my own healing, to kind of get over my struggles after the war. And he once told me, I asked him what he would do differently if he could go back in his career. And he said he would have written his book sooner. So that was an inspiration for me to, let me write a book. And I knew I didn't have much of a platform, but a book becomes this thing that just it's so expansive beyond you, right? Like it can reach all corners of the globe and touch lives without your physical presence being there. And I thought, okay, let me start writing a book. And I was trying to think what to write about. And I knew I sort of had, with life experience, I had mastery over this. I could claim expertise on this topic of fear, right? And pushing ourselves. And that was the biggest barrier that stops people. So it was also something worthy to write about. And I also wanted to shift the relationship that we all have with fear, because people say things like we should be fearless or don't be scared of anything. And that to me was so wrong. And it's what makes people feel fear of fear. And that's what stops them, is not the fear. It's the fear of fear. So that's what led me to saying I'm going to write a book. And my wife came up with the word Fearvana. And when she did, I was like, that's gold. I trademarked it, bought 20 different domains around it. I was like, okay, this is it. That's the book. That's initially even we were going to call it The Other Side of Fear, but I'm so glad we didn't, because we decided to stick with Fearvana. And now Fearvana is everything. That's the whole, essentially now what I'm working to is what Richard Branson is to Virgin. I want to be to Fearvana and build it out into many different verticals. But that's what led me to the book. And it took me about 3 years of writing. I must have trashed about 100,000 words worth of work to get to where it is now. But I'm grateful for it, because I think it led to a lot better book. And as I think you might have seen, I've been blessed with some pretty cool endorsements, including the Dalai Lama, who wrote the foreword for the book. So, and that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't trashing those 100,000 words worth of work. It wouldn't have happened if I wasn't scared about writing a bad book.
No, that's a decent endorsement, I think, right?
Right? Yeah, certainly can't complain about that. It was tremendously just a huge honor and very humbling for sure.
And so then, how did that happen? How did that merge with your next project, which is I don't know if we connected about Fearvana first or about this project first, but that's kind of where we've been kind of talking back and forth, and
Yeah.
you're like, oh, it sounds crazy, but it doesn't sound that crazy. It sounds a little crazy, not
Yeah. No, I mean,
not so crazy.
yeah, you can absolutely relate considering what you've done.
Yeah, I'm like that sounds interesting. I'm in.
Right. So no, so that kind of came about in my own healing to come up with this. I wanted something to channel my conscious energy, to give me focus, to become a lifelong mission. Because to me, like I don't know if I'll do all countries. I don't know when I'll do it, but I know that the journey itself will be beautiful, and it already has been. Like I've done 8 countries so far. I kind of sidelined it a little bit to finish the book and to start building out the ecosystem of Fearvana, because like doing the 8 countries was a beautiful experience for me, but what I want it to be now is something so much bigger than me. So we started a nonprofit called Fearvana Foundation, and when I do these runs now moving forward, I want it to be like in service of something. So I want to go from being sort of the performer to being the platform from which I can create others to perform, right? Like a stage to shine a light on other people's greatness and their Fearvana moments kind of thing. And so, I mean, I just have beautiful experiences on the run so far that I like personally, but now I wanted to like finish the book, build Fearvana out a little bit. And so when I get back onto it, which I'm planning on next year, I can now leverage the larger platform that's growing and continuing to grow. I mean, we could reach this huge pool of college students once we build out the Fearvana Academy, which is essentially an educational institution for the younger generation to teach them these kind of life skills that they're not learning in school. And then we want to shine light on these stories that I've experienced personally on my runs and share like a different side of humanity. I mean, because you turn on the news, what do you see? Human beings are evil, like the world is falling apart. And I think that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that like, oh, this is who we are. But like, if we share a different side of humanity, and I'll give you a small example, I'm sure you've experienced this on your own journeys kind of thing, but like, when I was running 55 miles across Luxembourg, I was midway through some small town in Luxembourg. I couldn't even tell you what it was. I was like kind of hurting. I was suffering. And I stopped to put a little wrap around my knee, like to wrap around my knee. And this gentleman, like small town in Luxembourg, saw me, and he could tell like this scruffy looking brown dude was like suffering in the middle of this town. Didn't speak any English. I barely spoke any French, but I was kind of showing him on my phone what I was doing, that I was running from south to north. And, he invited me into his home for water, like a complete stranger inviting me into his home for water. Gave me a big hug as we parted ways. And it was such a beautiful experience of how, like, when you struggle, when you suffer together, like Jim Jones, who I know you follow, Bobby Maximus, it's the gym that trained the actors from 300. But like he always says, a family that suffers together stays together, which I absolutely love because it's like, and it's so true. And I've experienced that tangibly in these runs in the Marines. And now I want to share this side of humanity with people as I get back on it next year. So I'm going to continue doing some smaller countries. And in 2 years, 2 to 3 years, I want to do the U.S. and in India after that. So I'm working on trying to do something cool with that, maybe tie it into like a documentary or even a movie release, because I feel like my story can be movie worthy, and we're trying to see what we can do to make that happen. I have some things in the works on that front. So if I can like create a Fearvana movie and tie a run across the U.S. to that would be pretty awesome. So,
how many countries you're going to? Is it? What list are you working off of? Do you have a specific list? Is it the 193? Is it like the 196? Yeah. There's like 5 different country lists, and depends on who you talk to. They'll get real mad that you didn't use their version or whatever.
I'm not thinking that far ahead, to be honest with you, because it's one of those things that it can get too daunting. So I'm just like thinking, okay, what's the next one? What's the next one? What's the next one? So there's a few that that I want to do in Africa and Europe, smaller ones next year.
Okay.
That I want to get back into the middle of next year. As I mentioned to you, I think before we started, talking here, as right now I'm in India and I'm working with this startup guru, like amazing dude whose name actually also happens to be Akshay. But we're working to build out the Fearvana empire, if you will, and build it out into many different verticals. So as we start building the foundation for that, that'll give me the space to say, okay, now things are moving. Like we have partners in place, investors, all kinds of stuff. Let me go take a little quote unquote break and and go do a few runs and a few trips. Like I haven't done an adventure trip in a little while, so I'm kind of like fiending to get back out there myself.
So which countries have you done already?
I've done Luxembourg, Greenland, which was the big one. I've done Monaco, fairly small, which is I have this list. It's been a little while since I've done it. What are the ones I've done? Okay. I should know this. Malta, which is 20. Yeah, Barbados. I I got heat exhaustion in Barbados. So I was supposed to do like a bunch more countries in the Caribbean on that. And I got like severe heat exhaustion and was in kind of bad shape. So I ended up just doing Barbados. It was 28 miles across there. So what is that? I can't remember how many I said, but those are a few: Malta, Luxembourg, Monaco, Greenland. I think there's a few more. I'll have to look up.
The Vatican.
Yeah.
Liechtenstein.
Vatican. Yeah. Small ones like that. Vatican was just basically like a little stroll across the, but
get a walk backwards over it.
Greenland was the big one. That was a cross country skiing trip, 350 miles. Luxembourg was a little bit big, 55 miles. Barbados was 28. Malta was about 20. And some of these were kind of back to back. So it was like by the time I got to 20 miles in Malta, I had just finished Luxembourg and a few others. And I was like exhausted, but it was beautiful. Like, as you know, like I think that the greater the exhaustion, the greater the high when you finish. Like even Barbados, I ended up getting like pretty bad heat, like severe full body heat cramps and heat exhaustion, like on the toilet, ready to throw up after I was done. But because I was ready for the mileage, but I wasn't really ready for the heat and the humidity. I wasn't prepared for that, and that was again my fault. But again, lesson learned. But it was cool, you know. I mean, having those experiences, like, and again, through the suffering, I connected so much with people. Like this one woman gave me a free hotel in Barbados to sponsor because she loved what I was doing. After the run, when I was like struggling with cramps, she stopped and bought me like coconut water on this like street, like vendor guy, and he just heard what I did. She told him, and he just put his fist in. He was like, "Respect, man," and give me a little pound. Like there's these beautiful moments of like human connection that happen when people see you rise above yourself to accomplish something, and it's like ultimately arbitrary, right? Like, I mean, I ran from one of the countries, so the meaning behind it is what you make it mean and what you assign it. And to me, it's like the human experiences that come from that are really powerful. And
I think people underestimate too what they can get out of something, because they see people talk about, oh, I was sick, I got heat exhaustion, I was super tired, whatever. And if you haven't done it, what you won't ever know is how good it feels to have done that. And it sounds terrible. It sounds stupid. And if you're listening and you haven't done something like that, like they probably think I'm like talking crazy, but there's something about those times where you look back. I had this race in Thailand where, I basically had the same thing with heat exhaustion, and I somehow finished it or whatever. And I'm just like, think about that race all the time. Is like, that was one of those moments where you got to know yourself pretty well, and I had this other race in like Finland where I ran out of water, and everything that could go wrong in Finland went wrong. I was eating snow. I had to like melt snow down to water, then it refroze because it was so cold out. Like everything went wrong that could possibly ever go wrong. But I still look back on that race and I'm like, that was one of the my favorite experiences of the last year. And it doesn't happen. Like it's going out, doing those difficult things, creating those memories of terrible, horrible situations, and knowing that you're going to get through it. And when you have perspective on how tough things can actually be, you realize, okay, the thing that I'm pushing myself through is really tough and it's really hard, but it's not my breaking point yet. Yeah. And when you do that, like, you get a different perspective on all sorts of other issues in your own life, in the world. And I don't know. I think doing those hard things is key. And if you're not doing it, you're missing out.
Absolutely. Like, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I remember reading your blogs about that, and that's so awesome, man. I love that story. I can imagine, like, in it, obviously it's just pure suffering, but like looking back on it, and sometimes even when you're in it, like, it's this beautiful thing. Like, that's what I define Fearvana as. I call it the bliss that results from engaging your fears to pursue your own worthy struggle. So your own worthy struggle could be anything. It doesn't have to be running ultras or climbing mountains like you or me. It can be like, it could be writing a book, building a business, raising a child, like playing chess. I have a friend who's about to be a grandmaster in chess and her struggles, but that's like her worthy struggle. Like, we all have our worthy struggle, and there's absolute bliss in finding, like, I firmly believe the greatest gift in life is finding what that worthy struggle is and like embarking upon it, learning how to smile in the face of that struggle and taking on one challenge at a time. Because ultimately, as you know, like, whatever worthy path whatever you pursue in life, even if you choose not to pursue anything, life is gonna be hard, So it's not about like finding the joy. It's asking yourself, how much suffering are you willing to endure to get the results you want? And if you, the more you're willing to like endure suffering, the more you find within yourself. And ultimately, it's like, it leads to not just success, but joy as well.
Well, I think something that people get hung up on sometimes is they're chasing happiness all the time, and they always want to be happy. And there's that question of what's one counterintuitive but important belief, or something that most people think is most people don't believe or whatever, or that you think is important. I think Peter Thiel asked that question. And my thing is always, I think happiness is a byproduct of the things that you're doing. And if you're doing, we haven't talked a ton about that worthy, difficult thing, but like that's what I always tell. It's like you want to be able to do hard stuff that is worth it. Like you don't want to do hard stuff that you're just like hating the whole time and pissed about it. But if it's worth it and you want to, what's on the other side of it, it's those really difficult, really tough, challenging experiences that you look back on 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, whatever later, and be like, that was a game changer. That was a big deal. That was, that was a memory I want to, and every time you think about it, you just get like a stupid smile on your face. Like that to me is more interesting than like this kind of surface level happiness that's kind of riding day to day that doesn't really come out of, it's more of a saccharine sweet, like surface level versus like a deep happiness that like you did something, that you accomplished something, and it was really tough because you challenged like your soul while doing it.
Yeah, no, totally agree, man. And that's that's part of the problem is like we live in a world that's always looking for the easy way out, like the demonized emotions like fear and stress, like you should be stress free. And I'm like, no, like just like the body grows through stress, so does the mind and the spirit, And actually, even like the largest study on happiness, there's a great book that you might have read, Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. In it,
I haven't read it. No,
it's awesome. Great book. But anyway, in it, like Professor Chickmensihai, he did this large study on happiness, thousands of people across the globe for decades. And he actually concludes that like in all this research that the best moments in our lives are not the passive, receptive, relaxing times. The best moments usually occur when a person pushes their body and mind to their limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. And that's a direct quote from the book, actually. So that's that key part there. It's a voluntary effort. Like you said, it's your worthy struggle, right? Like it doesn't have to be the same as somebody else, but when you find that and to accomplish it, it's pure bliss, man. It's like bliss. It's success. I mean, that's how you get more too in every way. So I think inviting people to start pushing themselves and discovering what that worthy struggle is and stop looking for like a fearless, stress-free and anxiety-free life. Like instead seek out a meaningful stress, a meaningful fear.
Like it's not that you want to avoid stress. It's you want to become someone who can bear it. And I think so many people get so worried that they're not going to be able to handle the stress that they shy away from it. And it's really it's about becoming someone who can know that you can perform under that level of stress and keep moving forward. And when you can do that, then there is less fear. I think then there is the fear. Instead of shying away from the moment, you can push towards it. It's more of a, like fear and excitement are kind of two sides of the same coin. And it's just like, if you're fearing something, you're like, oh, I'm scared of it, and I don't want to do it. And excitement is like, oh, it's scary, but I'm looking forward to going ahead and doing it.
Very much two sides of the same coin, like you said. Totally agree.
That's cool. So I was actually on the way back from South Africa. I think I texted you or emailed you about this, but I was on the way back from South Africa after 777 and found myself right outside Liechtenstein. And ended up like impromptuly like running across Liechtenstein, which is I found it was like the 6th smallest country in the world or something that. And it's like 13 miles. And then I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of interesting. And then I went down to Monaco, and Monaco's like 3 miles. And then I was like, interesting, I could start doing it. And then I was like, I think Akshay's doing that. That's like his thing. I can't take that. But it's interesting how like it was a 2 or 3 mile run. Monaco's super small, so it's like it was a ruck. I think I did. I threw some stuff in my backpack and ran across it. But it was one of those things that you said earlier that I wanted to come back to was you kind of define you put your own meaning on things, and like it was you could run 3 miles pretty much anywhere, but if you decide that you're gonna like put a structure in and around it, and you're gonna run 3 miles across this certain piece of land in like southern France, all of a sudden you got one country down, and then all of a sudden you have 13 miles between Austria and Switzerland or whatever, in this little valley where cows are grazing, and there's nothing else going on in Liechtenstein other than people are storing money, I think, in banks. But like if you run those 13 miles, and all of a sudden it's like another country, and that was really interesting as far as like setting setting the table for different accomplishments that you could go out and thinking about making your own structures for things that, like maybe add more meaning to your life in small but interesting ways.
Yeah, totally agree, man. Because ultimately, like, why do anything? Like, but I think when we find meanings and give that it adds a lot and gives you purpose, it gives you focus, something to channel your consciousness and energy to, right? So that's the worthy struggle now. So for me, basically, my whole rest of my life is building out Fearvana, like the universe and fitness and this journey. So like fitness and entrepreneurship are my two paths, and that's like my whole worthy struggle for the rest of my days.
All right, everybody. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you like the podcast, please head over to iTunes, Google, Stitcher, Art19, wherever you're listening to the podcast, and leave us a review. It helps us reach more people and challenge them to change their mindset and their fitness and do something impossible with their lives. So that's the number one way you can help out the podcast. Also, if you'd like to support the podcast, there's a couple ways you can do that. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, you can head on over to impossiblegear.com and pick up some apparel that's going to help improve your bench press, improve your deadlift, and make you run faster. Check it out. It looks awesome. It feels awesome. Makes you awesome. So why not go pick some up today? Also, there's a couple apps that we've built to actually help you push your limits and get stronger, get faster. First app is Cold Shower Therapy. If you're not familiar, 5 minutes, 30 days, cold showers, change your mindset, change your life. The app is built just for you guys. It's got a huge community and over a bunch of people with a bunch of streaks. And I think the longest person is going on 3, maybe 4+ years straight of cold showers. So you can join the community, find a bunch of other crazy people that are pushing themselves, and do it yourself as well. It's a free download on iTunes and Google Play. So just head over to coldshowertherapy.com to find out more. And lastly, MoveWellApp.com. If you're an athlete trying to get stronger, or you're recovering from an injury, or you're just sitting at your desk and you've got a lot of pain, MoveWell App is the mobility coach that can help you start feeling better. It's a free app to download that shows you mobility routines based on your specific need, whatever that is. It's a couple bucks a month if you want the pro version, and it's the best money you can spend on your body, period. So that's it, MoveWellApp.com. Again, if you guys like the show, please go leave a review. Thank you for listening, and remember, push your limits, do something impossible, and of course, boom.